number one reason that you would engage a consultant? Was it because the company is losing money? Was it a culture issue? Was it product? Like, what was the number one reason?
मसला ये है, we are our productivity. However you want to measure it. आप उसको output per hour कह लें, आप उसको number of pieces per hour कह लें, आप उसको GDP per capita कह लें. Our productivity is low. Other people who do the same work as us.
And when you're saying incentives to the labor in the system, you're actually talking about compensation related incentives, or there could be a wide range.
State Bank had over the last 10 years estimated something like, I think it was 5 trillion or something. The number was out recently, right? So these are numbers that, given that our total tax collection target for this year is 12.9 trillion, customs जो है उसके नीचे आता है. आपने सुना होगा कि पोर्ट के ऊपर आके प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने बजाते खुद ये इनॉग्रेट किया a faceless. So the custom inspector now sees on video, inspects on video, and there's no way to attach the goods that he's inspecting with the owner of the good.
Would you work for the Prime Minister's office? And would you work there for free? Would you give up your time for structural reform that has been hard to implement in this country? Well, I've had this discussion with one of the most interesting people I know, Salman Ahmad, who's the former country head of McKinsey Pakistan. McKinsey, the big consulting global powerhouse around the world. And he is now spending his time and he's serving our country by helping with some of the great structural reform initiatives. Check out this episode of Digitales. Salman Ahmad, how are you today?
I'm very well. How are you, Faizan?
Good. Thank you for taking the time out and coming here and having this chat with me. I've never had a former consultant, and that too from McKinsey, and that too one who led the operations for this country, come and have this chat with me. So I'm actually very excited.
I'm equally excited. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm hoping that we can, enjoy of sharing a few thoughts.
Yeah. And so I want to start this off by first understanding your career. You spent 25 years at the number one consulting firm in the world, right? McKinsey. And you spent that time in their New York practice, in their Dubai practice, and then you came and brought that to Pakistan and you set up the Pakistan office about 13 years ago in 2012. So walk me through your career at McKinsey before I jump into sort of the meat and bones of this.
Well, the career was, it goes back a bit. Before that, I was a teacher. As my first career, I was a teacher. I really enjoy and still enjoy teaching. And, but then, basically, pursuing learning new things. I'd gone into the world of finance, and so I headed off to business school, and from business school what I thought was really interesting was trying to or approaching things in a problem solving way across a variety of different problems, because the problem always gets renewed. No two things that we do are ever the same. Either the client is different, or the industry, or the problem, or the geography, or the team is different. So it's everything seems always fresh, and I really enjoyed that aspect of my work. So I was circa 2000 and 2001 in New York City, and so. It's fascinating because so many offices all over the world, and I had thought at that point that there's no Pakistan office, and this is an institution. It's a institution of global import, and that there should be a Pakistan office. So then, long story short, it took quite some time. If you think back to 2001 and the sort of trajectory that we've gone through since then. Eventually, I moved to the Dubai office because that was the closest office to Karachi that we had, and that was the thought all the way. So it took some time. If you think about that time, back in 2010, 11, and 12, it was counterintuitive to have multinational presence in Pakistan.
Yeah, because it was a difficult time
It
then.
was a lot of multinationals were actually exiting.
Yeah, and security was a big issue then.
And that was the time that we actually made the decision to do this.
And I remember so McKinsey had set up an office here, and I remember this distinctly because I just moved back from the US. And a part of me was like, what are these guys thinking? Why would they ever, I mean, I understand why I had to move back, but why do they need to be in Pakistan? How would they make money? Because the engagements are expensive.
I don't want to make this about McKinsey,
Yeah.
but it is one of the most surprisingly non-commercial institutions that you'll ever find, and people often don't believe that about because you're a consultant, and so but there's no business plan. It's a passion to solve important problems.
I find it hard to believe. So
Like
the
I
company
said, you probably
that makes business plans or solves business problems.
I think, Faizan, that's actually misunderstood about business. Business, as properly interpreted, is in providing products and services that people need in order to get on with their lives.
True.
The target of business is not profits. Profits are a marker, an outcome of what happens when you do business well. And there's always competition in order to ensure that you're not just piling on excess rents from scarcity, that you're earning your surpluses through competition and innovation, and so if nothing else, I mean, there was obviously a lot of risk in doing what we were in thinking this and planning this, but all my mentors had always advised me to say, don't worry about, just worry about, are there important problems and that we would be able to tackle.
Right.
And if that is the case, then everything will go well. I remember I was presenting to a group of partners, and we had an hour-long presentation and so on and so forth. And within 5 minutes, one of them, a senior partner, stopped me and he said, "Look, you're preaching to the converted. There's only one question: when are you moving?" And
okay, interesting.
Yeah, but that was an easy answer.
And so when you solve these complex problems, right? And so as consultants, I think one of the biggest, I remember when I was interviewing, I considered the consulting career and then I chose banking because it was more transactional. But what I liked about consulting is the variety of business problems you get to see and work with. So one day you could be working with a food business, and then a tech business, and then a random services business. How can so what is the model for consulting companies to help businesses that may be struggling or need some guidance or assistance along the way? Is there a standard model in the way they approach things?
Because of the diverse and nature of the client, their context, what function or industry they belong to, what problem they're facing.
Right.
The permutations are endless. Like you said, the variety never gets old, right?
Yeah.
No engagement looks like the last one.
Yep.
So it's difficult to distill something that's too specific to a particular industry or so on, or a function. But what there is an approach, right? And I actually when you write down a recommendation, when you say, okay, here's what I think you should do, that's probably at the pinnacle of this chain, which starts with, so you can make an observation about something. You can look at a situation, you can observe it, right? You can say, and that observation may be quite obvious to the listener, or maybe it's a bit more obscure, but that's observation, right? Then there's analysis. The next step is, okay, let's take this bunch of observations and see what kind of insights they can yield. If we go deeper, and especially in the context of the problem that you're trying to solve, then you can start to do some analysis, and then you get to diagnostic, because that's when you are first in even identifying the problem. Because the statement of the problem could be, well, we are losing market share, right? But why? Why are you losing market share? Is there excess competition? Are your capabilities not keeping up? Is it a price issue? Is it, what's happened? So that's diagnostic. And then from there's recommendation. Without a good, solid diagnostic, you cannot recommend, because problems can appear like each other, right? And without an accurate diagnostic, you're just you're not doing anything meaningful. You make a recommendation based on the diagnostic, and then there's implementation, which is often missing, right? And more and more, you have to make sure that the steps recommended are being carried out. And then there's monitoring. So without this whole chain, the difficulty, what's tricky about this is that to the untrained eye, observation, analysis, diagnostic all look
similar.
80-20, it's very difficult to tell, but wait, hang on a second, there's no recommendation here. And it's actually the recommendation that puts skin in the game to say, with our professional reputation, right, here's what we think you should do, and to stand behind it, right? So most of a lot of advice that I see rendered is just observation.
So I'm just thinking of like a doctor with a patient, right? The minute they see a patient, they'll kind of check that, the vitals, they'll ask them a few questions, they'll get their observation and analysis done, and then they'll send them to the lab for the diagnostics. And when the diagnostics come back, then they give them the actual recommendation.
And you can diagnose the quality of the hospital and the quality of the doctor and the likelihood of success from their desire to actually do the diagnostic.
Yes.
Right?
And some people
because if you're pattern matching at the observation stage, you're going to kill a lot of people.
Yeah, because diagnostics is very important.
Diagnostic is it. It is in fact the application of the scientific method to medicine.
So just for my understanding, the difference between diagnostics, analysis, and observation, if I was to break it down, what would it be?
Well, observation
is what I see.
Observation is low cost, right? Because it can be a trivial observation.
So it could be just asking people in a business or a company or in an environment.
Anticipating what I want to talk to you about today, imagine this. Just pick up the newspaper today.
Yeah.
And a ton of people will be writing, well, the economy is not growing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
How much midnight oil did you burn to figure that one out?
Yeah.
Right? So that's observation.
Okay, that's observation.
Right? Now, analysis is, okay, so let's look at the data, economy is not growing, so what are the component parts, right? Let's break it down. Let's gather some more facts, right? And then start to put them together and digest them. And that's analysis. And then you say, we are not productive. Okay, that's
your analysis.
Diagnostic.
That's diagnostic.
That's diagnostic.
Okay.
Right? The real problem is, right? The real problem is not leakage. The real problem is productivity, competence-led productivity, right? That's lacking. Then the recommendation is, okay, go build that go build that productivity, the competence that leads to that productivity, the infrastructure that you need to enhance that productivity, all of those things, right? And then there's implementation, and then so right? And so, but if you shoot wrong, if you diagnose that the problem is that everything is there, the competence is there, the resources are there, everything is there, right? So you'll often hear, there's cliches about Pakistan, right? That we are a well-endowed, richly endowed country, but and then the but is just some small, it's like, bas ye hota, to kahan se kahan pahunch jate, right? And in fact, the diagnosis or the observation and the analysis is कि वो जी वो एक ज़माना था बहुत अच्छा था, and things have been declining. There's actually no evidence to that. If you look at our output, it has been monotonically growing. It hasn't been growing as fast as we'd like it to be growing, but then we have to see what are the reasons for that and what must we do to address it.
And when you would be called into most engagements, what was the number one reason that you would engage a consultant? Was it because the company is losing money? Was it a culture issue? Was it product? Like, what was the number one reason?
Well, look, there's a variety of reasons. I think that, when a company isn't doing as well as its owners and sponsors would like it to be doing, there's it's not, there's nothing that is in business. The issues are not like you have to invent finance in order to take a look at it, right?
Right.
So they resemble each other, right? And so it's in subtly teasing apart that what is the particular manifestation of the same basic concept that you have to organize well, right? You have to govern well. There has to be accountability, not accountability of things are just going missing. That's not the accountability I'm talking about. The accountability is about, the company is taking certain risks, making certain investments, and bringing certain assets to bear for some required productivity and return. If that return isn't obtaining, then we have to figure out the accountability of why are those assets not being used in the way they ought to be used, and to boost those returns, right? And so in business, the problem statement is roughly the same. That, the shareholder is not deriving the returns for the risk and the capital that is being provided, right? Now, that can be where the bottleneck exists can be a variety of different things. But I call those manifestations, and that's where whether incentives will fix it, whether investment will fix it, whether technology is required, right? So they can be different answers at different times for different industries,
right?
But that's where the hard work is required, because you have to eliminate pretty systematically things that may be seeming like explanations, but they are not.
So and you also serve the Prime Minister's office in a pro bono capacity. You've been doing that for almost a year now, close to a year.
So from day one, I'd actually left a bit earlier than that, and then once the government was sworn in, I've been in Islamabad since then.
And so if I was to take this approach that you've developed in consulting, right, to problem solve and to help businesses sort of find the right trajectory, and if you were to take that framework, which it seems like you're doing for the country, and apply it on the country, and we were to take the same steps you just mentioned and apply to Pakistan, what are first the observations you see?
Fair enough, but before we go into that, I should say you have very generously overstated my agency in this problem. I'm certainly there. I'm certainly trying to help with everything that I can contribute. But a lot of very smart and capable people are also,
Part of
are doing this. Right?
And I think that's one thing the government did was they tried to get a lot of technocrats in place that can bring industry knowledge, that can bring sort of a wealth of experience, and they can sort of supplement the parliamentarians in their decision making and in their legislation to take the country forward.
Absolutely. So, if you want to predict the success of an endeavor, first you meet the team.
Right.
Because you can't do it with a team that, and we know this from sports, we know this from any endeavor that requires more than one individual. In fact, even with the one individual, there's usually a team behind the individual. Right? And so I just wanted to set a bit of a framework for the discussion.
Sure, yeah.
The framework for the discussion is, what ails the economy? Because this has been an elusive problem, right? And in any daily that you read, you have some pretty obvious observations.
Yes, and that's exactly. So it's the observations that will help us identify what ails the economy.
Well, but the observations are just the observations that alert you to something ails the economy.
Okay, so something ails the economy.
Something ails the economy, but I don't think that we need further proof.
So we know something. Okay, so that we've established.
Let me jump ahead to, because I've been thinking about, spent some time doing this. मसला क्या है?
In summary.
मसला ये है कि our productivity, however you want to measure it, आप उसको output per hour कह लें, आप उसको number of pieces per hour कह लें, आप उसको GDP per capita कह लें, our productivity is low. Other people who do the same work as us, make the same goods and services as us, can either do more in the same cost or can do the same amount at a lower cost.
It's that simple.
It's not simple. It's simple to explain. It's not simple to solve.
Right.
Right. In fact, the hardest problem to solve
is productivity.
Right. It's productivity. And if you look at economic analysis all over the world, they obsess about productivity. And regional, country, even within countries, the states, provinces, and so on and so forth, they want to look at productivity, and because that is the fundamental driver, right? So the model of the economy that I want to talk about is an aggregate model, right? You can think about it as the country's GDP is the aggregate of every individual's value add over the course of a year. Now, you don't calculate it that way because it's too complex to calculate aggregates that way. You estimate in a variety of different ways, but it's a diffuse problem. It is not a concentrated problem. And that's where, the analysis and the recommendations that we encounter, they have often not looked at the scale of the problem.
Okay.
Right? Because 240 million people, it's the fifth largest country in the world.
Right.
And it's no joke. If you Punjab alone is the 11th largest country in the world.
Yeah, that's true.
So these are huge numbers, and it's the recommendations that we have typically put this burden to a few people and say, fix it. And if it's not fixing at the pace and the rapidity that we would be comfortable with or happy with, then you're doing something wrong. Now, I'm not excusing anything. It's a complex problem, but I think that we over-index on particular aspects of this problem.
So when we think about productivity, right? So productivity is an output in a sense, and the inputs on that would be labor, There would be, let's say energy. The inputs would be so labor, resources. Resources would be financial, energy.
In order to just streamline the problem, look, you want to raise productivity.
Yes.
You have to do two things. One or both.
Right.
One is you have to provide incentive. The agent of productivity is labor, right? And labor must share in the upside it creates by working harder, longer, more efficiently, whatever. It takes more effort. And so their effort has to be rewarded through incentive, which is a sharing of the upside with them. So that's incentive. And I think that the USA has, in management science, this is all management, right? So they've cracked this nut. How to optimize the set of incentives that makes organizations collaborate and efficiently produce. Right. So you either do that. The other lever is investment. Right.
Okay.
Because investment will buy automation, it will buy technology, it will buy efficiency, and so on and so forth. Right. And so those two are the things that you can move. So now notice that we've taken the output that we want and broken it down into two levers, which are actionable levers.
Right.
You can do something about those. Right. You can act on setting better incentives. That's something that you can do. But you can't address the output directly. You can't say raise output.
No, it makes sense.
That's an outcome.
Yep. It's like profitability of a business.
It's not an input.
Yeah.
Incentives are an input. Investments are an input.
So what would be the labor incentives that we can drive that are missing at this point?
Well, if you consider the problem, if you look across, right, performance incentives are very few, right? I mean, they're labeled performance incentives. They're called bonuses. Institutions give them, right? But the differentiation in the bonus of the top performer and an average performer, those differences are huge in many parts of the world. Right? In fact, the debate there is quite converse. It says, hey, have we made this incentive too high? So people will then start to figure out ways to just go for the incentive rather than to go through the productivity and delivery to the incentive, right? So, but that's not our problem. Our problem is, are there sufficient incentives, right? And are there sufficient disincentives?
And when you say incentives to the labor in the system, you're actually talking about compensation-related incentives, or there could be a wide range.
There's a variety of levers that will motivate a person, right? The unit of production can be motivated through positive, that you do more,
you get more,
you benefit more, right? And I don't want to turn it into a conversation regarding dollars, and it's not about that. It's about long-term growth, learning, and development of the productive unit.
And that could be an incentive in itself, the growth, learning, and development. It's not just in compensation today.
It's not just compensation today, it's compensation in the future. In fact, most of good, well-designed incentives look at the future, right? Because you want the person, individual, group, company to be saying, if we do better, right, then like if we deliver more, we benefit at the same pace, right? It shouldn't be extractive. It's a partnership.
Right.
It's not. It's in my analysis. It's not extractive. It's not a zero-sum game. As soon as it turns into a zero-sum game that I gain at your expense, then you'll stop playing.
Yeah.
right? You'll say, I have no upside in this, so I don't want to participate.
Yep.
So if we go back to these two levers, right, what happens is that without the diffuse and broad work that needs to be done to address these levers, and that's usually in the hands of the private sector, right? So people say, well, the government should do something to grow. The economy is not growing. The governments are better at removing barriers to growth than they are to actually, because that, to stimulate and trigger growth and to deliver growth, that's the job of innovation. Because, even in the incentives, you can innovate the incentives. You can innovate what kind of technology, collaboration, creating mechanisms of collaboration between organizations, large organizations. That in itself is a real skill. It's called management, and it's a science, right? And so all of those complex things, if you say, well, we are not satisfied, the economy is not growing, the government should do something, the government has one lever. And they can stimulate through spending. And when they do, that spurts the growth till the money runs out. And then we have a crash. And that's called the boom-bust cycle.
Which is what we're going through.
Which is not what we are going through now. And that's what I want to get deep into.
So I want to understand this. So you're saying that the growth can be triggered primarily by the private sector, and the government's role is to eliminate roadblocks in getting that growth.
The growth in profitability is the marker of private sector success in the absence of monopolies. Right?
Correct.
I don't want to get into a dry economics discussion, right? But if somebody's profitability is growing in the absence of monopoly, then they're doing something right.
So then what is the government creating as barriers today? Or what barriers exist today that the government should be removing to be able to trigger this growth? Because I haven't come to investment, because you said there were two things, right? There was obviously the productivity has the labor component and the investment component. We're focused primarily on the labor growth and the outputs coming out of that part of it, because investment's a little dry right now.
Yeah, very good. So look. So typically, governments will regulate for the very legitimate purpose of avoiding monopoly. That if we get into a monopoly, then obviously that becomes exploitative, and that's not helpful for anybody. That's excess rents. The government will regulate against monopoly, should regulate against monopoly, right? And the government will sometimes, or a lot of times, try to provide incentives for the private sector to produce more. Now, the first one is an absolute, requirement, because you want to ensure that no monopoly is obtained.
Are there any major monopolies in Pakistan?
We'll get into that's a whole segue into plenty of interesting territory, right?
Okay.
But let's go with this, and if there's right. But the other one, which I was, the incentives. Now, typically the incentive is, if you do this and this, we will
give you this.
Give you. If you do X, we'll give you Y.
Right.
Right. The problem is that X is already the core function of the industry or sector or something, right? Export more, okay? But if the owner and sponsor and principal of that industry or business is not exporting more, right? Will more incentive do it? Because there's some other issue that's holding that export up, right? Will incentive really do it, or will incentive simply get monetized?
Which is what's happening right now.
Which means that the incentive will get somehow or the other adjusted without delivering the outcome at which it was aimed.
And so in this case, if I was to use an example of the textile industry, that incentive works out in the form of tax rebates for remittance back in.
So what I
preferential loans and interest rates.
Today, let's stay agnostic
of industry
industry and particular company and so on and so forth, because that personalizes the discussion.
Got it.
But as a macroeconomic discussion, what we are grappling with is that the incentives
is not driving the outcome you wanted to.
Well, and there's little, macroeconomic purists will say that there's little evidence that any kind of incentives, protections, subsidies, support in the long run produces those outcomes, right? And, people give many examples that many countries have grown through this or that or the other, but, we won't have time to actually go into each one and analyze and so on and so forth. But you've got to look at overall, incentives are not a great, or at least not a very efficient, high return lever.
Okay.
Right? Businesses have their own incentive built in, which is to grow, to innovate, to deliver products and services that people demand, and that's where their skills lie. So this is just this is a framework of. I wanted to break down this boom bust cycle because every time we've had a period of macroeconomic stability that has obtained several times, and that's why people are likening today to the several ones in recent memory in the last 2 decades. Right? So we get stability, which is usually predicated on some sort of loan or, so macroeconomic stability when we are away from financial distress. Then there's a demand for growth, and that's done through spending and stimulus. It doesn't, because it's not organic, it doesn't catch on, it doesn't sustain. The fiscal spending, it runs out, and then it has to stop under the pain of covenants and promises to fiscal support providers, various entities, and so we stop, and then there's a crash, and that crash is quite catastrophic at times because we come perilously close to insolvency, and then so the cycle repeats, right? So my main thrust today. So let's try to. What are these structural reforms
that could lead to greater productivity?
Well, those are just macroeconomics 101, right? So there's 3. Basically, it says, keep your fiscal equation balanced and stable.
Okay.
Right. So what is it? One, to do the job of the government to deliver the safety, security, law enforcement, justice, the core mission, the task of the government, you need money, and that's tax, right? And so you have to be able to collect tax in a way that it doesn't disproportionately burden productive sectors,
which it is today.
Well, we'll get to that, right? So we'll get to that because we're what I'm going to try to share some information is that it's actually in a state of transition.
Okay.
From historically what we've been doing and what's happening from now and going into the future, right? And even at the expense of later on being told that, I told you so, it's never going to happen, I don't mind. It's okay. I'm going to let me lay a stake and see where it goes. So tax collection, efficient tax collection, right? Second is obviously now that's the revenue side of it, and then there's a spending side of it, right? And so there's 2 types of spending. One is just loss through inefficiency and ownership of economic assets, right? So state-owned enterprises. There's a long list. This is not surprising. This is not news. We know that, many are inefficiently managed. They don't have the levers that we were talking about, right? Investment is very difficult in them. Accountability is very difficult. The management processes, the incentives are well nigh impossible, right?
So why does the state get into those to begin with?
So good historical reasons, not good historical reasons, but
historical reasons.
There are explanations for how come we ended up in all these. But these are a big drain, and the numbers are public. State Bank had over the last 10 years estimated something like, I think it was 5 trillion or something. The number was out recently, right? So these are numbers that, given that our total tax collection target for this year is 12.9 trillion, right? So trillions are still not trivial, right, in this equation, right? So then that's lever number 2.
Okay.
Right? And then the third lever is just the footprint outside of state-owned enterprises, the footprint of the government machinery. These are ministries and the size of the government and all the functions that the government wants to run and so on, right? So these are the 3 things that structural reforms, so that we can reverse the cycle, right? We don't have to, if we don't reduce the losses and the expenses, then we have to keep on increasing the tax collection. Tax collection at the moment and historically has come from the formal sector, but the formal sector also is the productive sector, right? Productivity can be defined as who pays a greater share of their due tax.
That's the formal sector.
Right? So as far as the state is concerned, you should pay 100% of due tax. Right? And so the salaried individuals, well known, they pay 100%, it's deducted at source, let's move on, right? Then there's indirect taxation and so on, there's leakage even there, but then there's other avenues. So corporates pay some because they're formal sector and so on and so forth, but the estimate of the due share, according to current tax policy, how much is actually collected, right? And then there's sources of undocumented and all of that. So tax collection. So let's start there, because that's actually the engine of everything that a government can do, and that is the biggest lever of structural reform. Because what we want to do is include more and more people into paying a greater fraction of the legit tax, right, so that we can lower the burden on the people who are already paying a disproportionate share, because policy has to be tightened in order to collect more, because we have to balance the fiscal.
Right.
Phew. Now, so if we talk about that, and I'm not going to remember it, right, all of it, so I'm going to consult these things that I wrote down. So, revenue collection. Okay, I'm telling you that there are a number of firsts that have never been done before in Pakistan.
That are happening right now?
Right now. So let's start with this. Within 2 weeks of taking oath, right, this government had said, we will fix this. And here's what they've done. It's a complete transformation that's being aimed for. A digital and HR transformation that is underway, and it was made underway within a couple of weeks, right? Launched then. One of the top public officials has been assigned as the chairperson of the Federal Board of Revenue, right? Because that's the Prime Minister's vision, that you put capability at your most acute problems, right? The Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and the chair of the FBR, and of course the entire cabinet, the Prime Minister is personally, and I can tell you this firsthand, right, holding meeting, and let's just call it holding court, right? And summoning the people and saying, keep me updated, and wherever there's a problem, just let me know, and we will, because we cannot fail.
And what is it that they're exactly
doing? So what is it that's being done? So again, within the first 2 weeks, the Prime Minister said, this is a complex problem. It requires a lot of capability. It requires a lot of technology. Get the world's top consultant and put them in, just make it happen, right? And so also to avoid any, noise and so on and so forth, funding was found, very generous donors, right, who said, yeah, this is the right thing,
right.
And so we're happy to fund. And then that was put into place, and that transformation has been going on, and the Prime Minister personally, and the Finance Minister, and everybody who's related to the economy in the government is watching over this, right?
And what are they transforming? They're transforming the ability of the
state
to collect tax?
The entire tax machinery, right?
So they're transforming the entire tax machinery?
Well, so it will be digitized, private sector incentives, and ways to make people work efficiently, and
are they changing tax laws too?
No. So we'll get. Let me first look. The big issue with structural reform, right? We'll get to the tax laws in a second, because again a pioneering work has been done there, right? So, but a big impediment is just the inability and the lack of technology, the lack of organization capacity, the lack of incentives, a bunch of things that are missing. Just wishing tax collection increases and we formalize the economy won't happen. It's actually a process, multi-year process, right? But it's on. I've already met, so the personally overseeing, right? Now, they have separated for the first time the tax policy unit, the unit that says how much tax should be collected, how much should each entity or segment have to pay, right? They set the rates.
And why is that important to separate?
Now, because think about it, if the collection agency has both the task of collection as well as the policy making ability, right? Then there is a potential conflict of interest over here, right?
And this was always the case historically.
Historically, this has been always the case, and therefore it's a landmark achievement. You see, the thing is that we are so inured to complaining and so on, and structural reform nahi ho raha, kuch nahi ho raha.
तो इसकी बात क्यों नहीं कोई करता है?
देखें, आपके सामने हाजिर हूँ ना.
नहीं, बट बाकी जगहों पे
वो आप सही कह रहे हैं, लेकिन सबने बात की है. शायद ये भी पूछना पड़ेगा कि ये बात कोई लोगों के पास पहुंचाता क्यों नहीं है. देखें, कुछ शहर दे लोग भी ज़ालिम सन, कुछ सानू मरन दा शौक भी सी. So this is a collaboration, but for this collaboration to succeed, right? First we have to set, this is all the same, kuch nahi hoga, that insulation that we give ourselves against hope. कि तकलीफ ना हो बाद में, क्योंकि नाउमीदी जो है वो it's a very salubrious feeling कि कुछ होना ही नहीं है तो ठीक है. But actually this is a pioneering move, right? And also that, look, when you're talking about collecting revenue and balancing the fiscal equation, right? What's really going on? What's going on is that's a financial calculation. With the economic impacts of that collection or that tax or that policy left to, relegated to second priority. But now, with the tax policy unit under the Ministry of Finance, and with top professional, as a finance minister, that unit will figure out कि जी अगर यहाँ tax लगाया तो ये चीज़ें जो हैं उसकी implications हैं. ये upside है, ठीक है, collection बढ़े, लेकिन ये डाउन साइड भी तो है ना, कॉस्ट भी तो है. इट्स नॉट, पीपल शुडंट इमेजिन कि एक यूनिलैटरली आप वो टैक्स बढ़ाते जाएं और वो बढ़ता जाएगा. देयर इज अ लैफर कर्व व्हिच सेज कि जी आप ज़्यादा बढ़ा देंगे तो कम होता जाएगा, राइट? सो दिस इज द फर्स्ट टाइम दैट्स हैपेंड, राइट? सो लेट मी कंटिन्यू, राइट? सो देखें, एचआर ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की मैंने आपसे इसकी बात की. देन through the digital, already the digital analysis is going on, right? With the consultants and the machinery of the, for the first time, a tax potential, which is a very important number, because everybody guesses at that number. how many guesses have you heard कि जी पाकिस्तान की 300% इकोनॉमी अनडॉक्यूमेंटेड है?
Yeah,
Right? You've heard every number from 20 to 30% to 300-400%. But this is not how you can, right? If you want to go and you want to plumb a desert to see कि तेल इसमें से निकल सकता है कि नहीं, till you have some sort of idea of the potential कि कितना है और कहाँ है, आप ढूंढेंगे कैसे? You can't just go start taking pot shots. It's expensive.
you have to do a geological survey.
You have to do a survey. You have to, and so the equivalent of that survey is the digitization process. All the data that were previously, there were impediments to handing over the data, and then to analyzing them, and then to localizing where the leakage is, and then to aim initiatives at those. And say, we are going to collect from this much from here, this much from here. So that's all on. अब हमारी तरफ आ जाते हैं, अवाम की तरफ आ जाते हैं, ठीक है ना जी? तो आप मुझे बताएं कि आपके कितनी दफ़ा आप डिनर के ऊपर गए हैं और आपके दोस्त ने कहा कि यार ज़रा कच्ची रसीद तो ला के दे।
ये होता है, बहुत रेगुलरली होता है, हर जगह होता है।
जब आप रिटेल के पास जाते हैं कुछ खरीदने, तो कितने लोग पूछते हैं कि जी आप अपना टैक्स देते हैं? राइट? तो देखें, ये जो डिफ्यूज प्रॉब्लम जो होता है ना, वो सिर्फ टॉप डाउन नहीं सॉल्व हो सकता. इट हैज़ टू बी ए कलेक्टिव, क्योंकि वो जो चोरी है वो आपकी है. इसमें गलती मत कीजिएगा. वो कहीं कोई नेबुलस एब्स्ट्रैक्ट चोरी नहीं है, वो चोरी आपकी है. तो कौन पूरी करेगा? फिर आपको ही पूरी करनी पड़ेगी.
तो ये व्हाट यू आर सेइंग इज कि एक इंस्टीट्यूशनल लेवल पे जो चेंज आ रहा है वो तो अपनी तरफ
तो अभी मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ ना, तो एक और लीकेज जो आइडेंटिफाई हुई है. फॉर एग्जांपल, कि जी देखें, सेल्स टैक्स है, रिटेल पे जो भी और टैक्सेस लगने हैं, और जो कंज्यूमर चेन में टैक्सेस हैं, ठीक है, अब वो पूरे नहीं होते. अब एक उसकी एविडेंस ये है कि जी मसनूआत तो इतनी मैन्युफैक्चर हुई और वो बिक भी गई. जो टैक्स उसका, जो उसकी, अब यू नो द प्राइस, यू नो द क्वांटिटी एट सोर्स, लेकिन टैक्स तो उतना नहीं आया जितना आना चाहिए था. तो ये क्या हो गया? तो उसका एक तरीका है, एंड टेक्नोलॉजी इनेबल्स दैट, कि जी आप एट सोर्स गिन लो ना.
Track and trace?
No, track and trace is a different thing. Track and trace is a different thing, and that is, let me know, because that's already a pretty controversial and misunderstood and a variety of things. No, this is much simpler than track and trace.
Simpler than that.
It just says कि जी इतनी बोरियां आपने बनाई, मैन्युफैक्चर की, और उसका वीडियो है, और अब AI जो है वो गिन देता है. You don't have to sit with your people and count, and 24/7 आप उसको मॉनिटर करते रहें. वो एक वीडियो फीड है, और वो
ये टैक्स अथॉरिटीज ये फीड लेंगी कंपनी से.
अभी वो कैमराज एज यू एंड आई स्पीक वो इंस्टॉल हो रहे हैं
in different private plants.
And
private enterprise have to comply.
Well, that's the law.
Right.
That's the law. अच्छा, अब आप कहेंगे कि यार बहुत मज़ेदार कॉन्सेप्ट है ये तो, फिर तो उसमें से आपको पता लग जाएगा और यू विल बी एबल टू कलेक्ट. वंडरफुल. लेकिन थोड़ा सा सोचें, अब स्केल के बारे में सोचें. आपको पता है इस अमल को कंप्लीट करने के लिए कितने कैमरे की ज़रूरत है? 5 million.
हाँ, वही मैंने कहा, they would have been in the hundreds of thousands.
Right? So and maybe I'm remembering the number wrong or whatever. It's maybe okay, it's 3 million. ठीक है. अब आप 30 लाख कैमरे, राइट, जो आपने मंगा के, उनको करके, उनको डिस्बर्स करके, उनको अटैच करके, उनकी फीड्स, लोग समझते हैं कि यार कुन फैकुन कर दो, मतलब करो ना.
That's a big task.
It's a huge task.
मतलब 30 लाख कैमरे इंस्टॉल करना डिफरेंट प्लांट्स में नेशन वाइड,
और वो 30 तो मैंने आपको वैसे दिया है 50.
फिर कमांड सेंटर के साथ
कंट्रोल करना, फिर उनको नोटिस देना कि जी ये हुआ था, आपने इतने आप ड्यू हैं. वो कहेंगे कि जी ऐसा है ही नहीं, वो तो हम कैसे मतलब there's a whole dialogue and a debate and a dispute and so on and so forth, and then we have courts and we have rights and we have all of those things. It's a complex problem.
यही चीज एग्रीकल्चर में हो सकती है.
हर चीज में होगी. और फर्स्ट देख लें, 3 सेक्टर्स को कहते थे कि जी इनको कोई नहीं हाथ लगाएगा और नहीं होगा. ये कभी प्रोविंसेस ने अपने अपने लेजिस्लेचर्स के थ्रू वो टैक्स लॉज पास किए हैं, एग्रीकल्चर को टैक्स होगा. ठीक है, अब वो एकदम तो छत नहीं फट जाएगी ना, लेकिन तहमुल रखें, वो हो रहा है और वो होगा. राइट. रिटेल के ऊपर,
रिटेल, रियल एस्टेट,
ठीक है, उसकी अच्छा रियल एस्टेट की री रेटिंग हो रही है कि जी वो एट सम आउटडेटेड नॉन मार्केट प्राइसेस बुक वैल्यू के ऊपर वो प्रॉपर्टी चलती हैं. सो अ वैरायटी ऑफ डिफरेंट थिंग्स इज अंडर वे, एंड आई एम टेलिंग यू that the Prime Minister and his government, they're relentless.
But how is this not making its way out into mass media, or even those articles written in every newspaper in the morning?
The first sit down that I did was several months ago. Right. And now this conversation is different, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, yeah, there's a problem. This news is not getting out. Like, let's figure out what the problem is.
The camera thing I've not even heard of.
There you are, right?
I mean, the reform stuff, fine. I've heard of that, but that's a first for me.
But there's all of these are firsts, and to me, each one is more important than the other. And I'm telling you that these will not be rolled back. These will and our
because I was going to come to that, because oftentimes these big changes come in place and suddenly the next thing you know, next government comes.
But then and I don't want to make this a political conversation, right? Because this conversation ought to focus on the economy, right? But then we haven't had a person who says कि यार देखो मैं कोई tall claims. My agenda is to fix these problems in the economy. I've had a lifelong track record of delivering. That's my brand. I mean, he doesn't talk about brand. Please snip this out. Please snip this reference out. But the man is singularly focused on the most important problems that the country faces. He understands that the economy is problem number one, and without fixing the economy, all the claims that we otherwise make are just sham.
True.
And then he says it in ways that people then, misinterpret and make it and criticize. But really, the intent and the capability and the focus. If you have the product of those 3 factors, it's the best we are going to have. And I put my word on the line on that, कि जो कुछ हो सकता है वो होगा, कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. अच्छा, अब ये आपने and by the way, I'm not even done yet. Customs, because वो भी कस्टम्स जो है उसके नीचे आता है. आपने सुना होगा कि पोर्ट के ऊपर आके प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने बजाते खुद ये इनॉग्रेट किया a faceless, so the custom inspector now sees on video, inspects on video, and there's no way to attach the goods that he's inspecting with the owner of the good.
Really?
Faceless कर दिया, anonymize कर दिया.
इससे क्या बेनिफिट है?
आप बताएं. अगर आपके कोई भाई साहब उसमें काम करते हैं और आप कहते हैं यार ये मेरी ज़रा ड्यूटी तो छोड़ दो, तो वो कहते हैं जी हमें तो पता ही नहीं कि आपकी कंसाइनमेंट कौन सी है. These are revolutionary steps, yaar. But at the same time, they're not rocket science. So the real question arises कि जो हम जिन claims को बड़ी देर से accept करते आए हैं, वो क्यों किया था हमने?
तो ये भी तो टैक्स कलेक्शन साइड पे आ गया. ये जो
बिल्कुल ये कस्टम आता ही FBR में कस्टम्स है. There's internal revenue service, inland revenue service, and there's customs. But that's also leakage, yaar. Right. And every penny that you fail to collect under current tax law, some honest taxpayer has to make up for it.
So by doing this, where I'm going with this is, by doing this, you're telling me that the salaried class tax burden will go down?
The first mention in this context that happens in any economic conversation in Islamabad is कि salaried वालों का FM has been in the press, in the media, saying कि जी वो or they have sacrificed inordinately. They have gone beyond their responsibility in, because देखिए अब, so let's get to a little bit of कि अभी तक क्यों नहीं हुआ और क्या हो रहा है ये वो. तो अब देखें, एक बजट जो है, that's a time limited, time barred event. That budget has to be formulated, the arithmetic, it has to balance. Okay, here's our projected sources of cash and here's our projected uses of it.
Right.
ठीक है, अभी हम सिर्फ रेवेन्यू की तरफ बात कर रहे हैं, राइट? तो वो जो इक्वेशन है, वो एक एक रुपया जो है उसमें बैलेंस होना पड़ता है, राइट? तो जब आप ईयर के बिगिनिंग में वो करते हैं, जब आपने कहा उस वक्त कि जी देखें ये हमारे खर्चे हैं और ये हमें फिर करना पड़ेगा, तो और हम जो अपना टैक्स बेस है उसको बढ़ा लेंगे एक साल हमें, क्योंकि बिकॉज इट्स नॉट ऑन डे वन दैट यू हैव टू हैव द कैश, राइट?
बिल्कुल ठीक है.
तो हम बढ़ा लेंगे, बट एट दैट पॉइंट गिवन आवर 70-year track record, nobody credited us with any कि जी अच्छा ठीक है आप बढ़ा लेंगे, राइट? और वो मुश्किल भी है, ऐसी बात नहीं है, इट्स वेरी रीजनेबल कि नहीं यार ये नहीं बढ़ेगा, राइट? लेकिन as we demonstrate the impact of all the things that I have put in front of you, वो बढ़ेगा, उसका क्रेडिट भी मिलेगा, और वो जो टैक्स burdens on the disproportionate tax burdens will start to come down.
Would there ever be a situation where the salaried class could ever see a rebate on the taxes that they paid disproportionately historically?
देखें, अब we can always wish for a shoot the moon, ठीक है? But I tell you, it'll be very difficult. It'll be very difficult. But the point is that good news lies ahead, right? And the right sectors are going to be receiving more easements, right? And the folks that have traditionally not pulled their weight, they will have to.
And how soon do you expect this to happen?
देखिए, ये अब मैं आपको let's try to project out कि कितना होगा, कैसे होगा, कितने टाइम में होगा. But these things are constantly
being added in.
This is priority number one, right?
So revenue collection and fixing revenue collection is the number one priority.
Is the number one priority, because without that there's nothing.
There's nothing. And the number two priority is straightening up our expenses.
Now we'll get to that, right?
Okay.
We'll get to that, because that's a whole thing. So let's, because there's a point that's now evading me, but वो शायद मुझे याद आ जाए, लेकिन बहरहाल let's move on. तो अब आप आ जाएं कि जहाँ पे जो tax requirement है, can we somehow lower the tax requirement rather than just so tax की बात थी. आज की हेडलाइन आप देख रहे हैं न्यूज़ में, फाइनेंशियल प्रेस में, उसमें कहा है कि FBR fails to meet the target.
Right.
ठीक है. अब I'm going to show you an example of glass half, a really depressing example. ठीक है. 9.3 से 12.4 trillion तकरीबन, right? 40%
increase
tax
collection
का target था, वो increase हुआ. This was a unprecedented and ambitious increase, and it was a necessary one, right? Because we must be able to demonstrate that we can raise a primary surplus, which means that we can do our debt servicing on our own
right
account, right? तो क्योंकि 9.5 trillion हमारी इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट है, ठीक है ना जी, तो वो करना था, तो उसके लिए ये करना पड़ा. एंड बड़े उसके साथ with great empathy ये बात हुई कि जी देखें इस वक्त तो टाइटनेस और ये होगा. अब let's say that by the end of it, I don't know where the numbers will finally fall out, but let's say that we can't collect out of the 40% increase, we only manage a 30% increase at the end.
It's still a big jump.
But so,
it's how it's projected.
So now this is what I'm talking about, right?
So even if there was a 30% increase, you're not getting the credit for it.
I get that Pakistanis will say कि यार नहीं, do more और करो हुकूमत, right? But what prevents us from at least celebrating our victories? यार ये तो, because everybody who looked at this and said and had international experience and could gauge where we are in development and growth, they said नहीं जी 40% बहुत कैसे होगा. अब वो उसमें से 30 हो जाएगा, उम्मीद है पूरा हो जाए कि कोई a few of these reforms kick in. We still have time to go till June 30th, तो kick in and we देखें, अगर बरकत शामिल हाल हो तो कहीं भी जा सकता है ना नंबर. लेकिन लेट्स से वर्स्ट केस सिनेरियो के जी 10% of the 40 is not collected. It's still,
you still hit 75% of your target.
We should stand on rooftops.
Yes, I agree.
Right? And say कि
so it's a part of how the message is also conveyed and projected.
देखें कि एक तो outcomes बड़े अच्छे, right? और दूसरा कि ये जो सारी चीज़ें हैं ये चल रही हैं और चलेंगी. और मैं तो लोगों को, जो people who are genuinely interested, देखें कुछ तो है ना कि जी वो आपके साथ बैठ के ड्राइंग रूम के अंदर
गप्पे मारेंगे और बस
चैलेंज करेंगे और कहेंगे कि जी हम तो हमें तो दर्द है और आपको नहीं है, तो वो तो उनको छोड़ दें. लेकिन एनीबडी हु इज जनरली, आप अपने रिप्रेजेंटेटिव से, जो लोग वहाँ पे अपनी पूरी जिंदगियाँ दी हुई हैं, उनसे कनेक्ट तो करें. जाके सलाम तो करेंगे जी क्या हो रहा है, हम क्या कर सकते हैं, राइट?
अच्छा, वो सब ने छोड़ दिया सोचना कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं.
छोड़ नहीं दिया, सोचते थे कभी
है. आई थिंक इट्स जस्ट के लोगों के साथ इतनी ज्यादती हुई है ना वक्त के साथ साथ. कुछ दे फील, कुछ लोगों के साथ जेन्युइनली हुई है, कुछ लोगों ने खुद की है.
मेरी उम्मीद ये है कि मेरी आपके साथ आखिरी कॉन्वर्सेशन नहीं होगी. तो फिर जब इसको जितनी डेप्थ में आप ले जाना चाहेंगे वी कैन गो, राइट? लेकिन देखिए, in a democracy, which people like to say we are not, but I insist that we actually are, right? And all democracies go through an arc of evolution and growth, and as the polity matures and evolves, then you evolve into,
a nation.
Rome was not built in a day.
True.
तो वो सब चीज़ें करनी होती हैं और organically करनी होती हैं. तो in a democracy, at the end of the day, काफ़ी burden जो है ना, जिम्मेदारी, वो मुल्क के जमहूर पे आती है. आप पे, मेरे पे, सब पे वो बट के आती है. ठीक है. और हुकूमत का काम ये होता है कि उनको जो लेजिटिमेटली स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं और करना चाह रहे हैं, उनको हुकूमत उनके रास्ते में हायल ना हो. और अगर उनकी कोई चोरी करने आए तो उसको रोक दिया जाए, अगर उनको कोई ख़तरा लाहक हो तो उसको रोके, और उनको बैरियर्स ना आए. ठीक है. लेकिन हुकूमत का, एटलीस्ट इन माई कैलकुलस एंड इन माई इकोनॉमिक्स एंड पॉलिटिक्स, हुकूमत का हर मसला सॉल्व करने का दुनिया में वो हुकूमत का मसला नहीं होता, क्योंकि उसको बादशाहत कहते हैं, उसको जमहूरियत नहीं कहते. अच्छा जी, अब काफ़ी एक दफ़ा वो बात होके फिर
तो टैक्सेस साइड पे तो आपने मुझे बताया कि ये बड़े इंटरेस्टिंग.
अब आप प्राइवेटाइजेशन पे आ जाए.
तो मैं उसी पे आ रहा हूँ कि जो आपने बात की थी कि टैक्स कलेक्शन साइड पे, राइट, कि दैट्स द रेवेन्यू साइड. सो यू गेव सम गुड एग्जांपल्स ऑफ व्हाट दे आर डूइंग. The expenses side is where we get stuck. Where we get stuck there. And it gets stuck, and sort of, I want to look at it from this way. It gets stuck for political reasons.
Well, let's see. Okay, so let's see what's happening.
So like PIA privatization.
Maybe I'll be able to surprise you.
Okay.
As I think I did.
You did with the cameras. You got me on that one.
Okay. No, but some of the other stuff as well.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the cameras are the tax policy unit, because these things are fundamental reforms.
And agreed, I agree. The tax policy and implementation, separation, that's a big one.
ये सारी चीजें, और उसको digitize करना, वो undigitize नहीं हो पाएगी.
वो तो digitize, so I will see it when I believe. I mean, I'll believe it when I see
Already
it.
हो रही है. You know, I can't. There are numbers that I'm privy to. I can't share.
Right.
But they have identified, they have isolated, and they've said.
And even the one with the real estate, वो जो book value को reassess करनी है.
वो तो हो गई है, already हो रही है, in process है.
Until they reach where they need to reach.
देखिए, वो तो अब when we get to when we get to the promised land.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? ठीक है, वो हम देख लेंगे.
But remember that my whole view on this is that we ought not to confuse journeys
with destinations. Yeah, I agree.
Right?
I agree.
And by the way, this is a continuous improvement journey.
Yeah, so this will not end.
Yeah, this will not end. This is that journey, the arc of that journey, actually tells you where you are as a polity.
Yeah. And I think that is an important distinction, because everyone is focused on the end destination, and that's not a destination you will ever arrive at.
End destination is subjective. It is informed by opinion, conjecture कि हमें ऐसा होना चाहिए.
Yeah, there's no.
मैं तो अपने दोस्तों से, आपसे भी मैं ये पहले पूछ चुका हूँ.
इस पे एक सवाल है.
हमें ये क्यों है कि हमें नॉर्वे होना चाहिए?
नहीं, but इस पे एक सवाल है. And before you go into the expense side of it, why not set a destination? Because देखें, अभी सऊदी ने, for example, सऊदी के अंदर इतनी बूम आ रही है और ये सब है, वो सब है. They documented a vision 2030. Right, wrong, ambitious, conservative, whatever you want to call it. There is something on paper that is a clear destination that the entire populace is now pointing towards and says we need to end up here. Where is our vision 2030? And why don't we have one?
This is a good question. Today, I will not go into foreign affairs, right? And you'll have to censor what I'm about to say next. लेकिन यार वो उसको नियम को देख लें, वो लाइन अब एक नुक्ता भी नहीं रह गया.
वो तो है.
पहले वो लाइन डैश बनी थी, फिर सेमीकोलन बन गई, अब फुल स्टॉप बन गई है. वो कुछ नहीं है, वो कुछ नहीं है. इट्स नथिंग.
डॉक्यूमेंटेड विजन होना चाहिए.
नहीं, डॉक्यूमेंटेड विजन देखें, पार्ट ऑफ दिस एफर्ट, राइट, इज टू आई हैव टॉक्ड टू पीपल, आई हैव सेड कि देखें, लेट्स गेट वर्ड आउट देयर, राइट. It's Faizan, it's fraught. It's not easy, and the irony in our country, is that before we determine who's friend and who's foe, and by foe, I don't want to doubt intentions, right? Intentions don't count for anything. Competence, right? So let's say who's competent and who's not that competent before we decide कि कौन हमारा फ़ायदा कर सकता है, हमारा भला कर सकता है, और कौन नहीं कर सकता. इस मामले को थोड़ी सी पेचीदगी में जाके, डिटेल्स में जाके पढ़ना पड़ेगा. पहले तो आप गुड ही डिफाइन करें ना. ठीक है. अभी जब मैं प्राइवेटाइजेशन और राइट साइजिंग की बात करूँगा, तो उसमें मैं I hold people to task. The interlocutors of this information, right, and who need to transmit it in as unvarnished a way as possible to the consumers of this information. ठीक है. मैं आप कई सवाल आए हैं जिसमें वो सिंपथी जो है वो अपनी तरफ कर लेते हैं. ठीक है. चैंपियंस ऑफ द पीपल वो बन जाते हैं, और चोर आपको ठहरा देते हैं. तो ये कहाँ का इंसाफ हुआ? ठीक है. तो ये कौन क्या कर रहा है ought to be the real question, और उस करने की क्या कीमत अदा कर रहा है, राइट? ये पूछें. उससे आपको ये आपने मेरे से कंसल्टिंग का पूछा था ना, तो ये एनालिसिस करनी ज़रूरी है कि कौन क्या कर रहा है, कितना एफर्ट कर रहा है, उसकी पर्सनल कॉस्ट कितनी है, और कहाँ तक पहुँचा. इस तरह से करें. अब आए जी प्राइवेटाइजेशन की तरफ. मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ another one, because this is a source of a lot of loss. ठीक है. एंड इट इज नॉट easy.
कितना करते हैं सालाना लॉस SOEs में? You said trillions में था, but that's over 10 year
period. 5 साल का
5
साल का था, या कितने साल का, 10 साल का था शायद. लेकिन मुझे
सालाना
सर का गिव और टेक a few hundred billion,
Yeah.
ये ट्रिलियन का नंबर आप
So 1 trillion, roughly.
सर का ठीक है, 600 बिलियन, 700 बिलियन, 800
So
बिलियन.
you're saying between 7 and 10% of your tax collection is on this inefficient ownership
ये
structure
ओनरशिप स्ट्रक्चर
of state-owned enterprises.
और स्टेट ओन्ड एंटरप्राइजेज, और ये
That's
मेंटेन
a
हो रही
lot.
हैं. अच्छा, अब जब
Imagine if you invested that in education or health.
वो तो I'm doing some analysis. I'm going to put it in those terms. Maybe on our next conversation I'll be able to tell you कि जी अगर आप ये ना करें
और ये दूसरी
इसको बर्दाश्त ना करें तो इतने स्कूल खोल लें, इसको बर्दाश्त ना करें तो इतने लोगों का मुफ्त इलाज कर लें.
तो बेसिकली पीआईए को चलाने से, पाक स्टील को चलाने से और इस तरह की सारे इदारे चलाने से तकरीबन 700 बिलियन 800 बिलियन रुपए एजुकेशन की तरफ जा सकते थे.
मतलब और कम
और
जा
whatever
सकते
else.
हैं, या मेरे ख्याल के मुताबिक तो वो टैक्स पेयर के पास भी रह सकते हैं.
हाँ, तो ये तो और भी बड़ा एडवांटेज है. टैक्स खुद डिसाइड करे क्या करना है पैसों का.
वो जो जिन लोगों के ऊपर डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट बर्डन है उनके पास भी रहता है.
सैलरी क्लास की टैक्स रेवेन्यू कितनी जनरेट होती है सिर्फ सैलरी क्लास?
The number slips me.
I think what it's about 3 million people in the salaried class who generate taxes.
But I don't want to estimate it that way because these numbers then get quoted around and so on and so forth. So right, so I'll get the number for you.
So coming back to
privatization, पहली बात ये है कि it is another, absolutely relentless and uncompromising, overseen by the Prime Minister himself. And he said कि जी, and there was hell to pay for वो unfortunate debacle हुआ है उसमें, but sometimes serendipity comes to your aid. वो ये हुआ कि वो जो हमारी यूरोप की फ़्लाइटें रुकी हुई थी वो उसके मान बाद बहाल हो गई. अब आप सोचें कि अगर वो डील हो गई होती और उसके बाद वो डील के बाद बहाल होती तो फिर तो जो होना था हमारे प्रेस और मीडिया में उसका अंदाजा
तो एक तरह से अच्छा हुआ कि वो डील नहीं हुई पीआईए की.
आई मीन आई डोंट वांट टू से अच्छा हुआ, लेकिन बात यह है कि उसमें एक अनइंटेंडेड
बेनिफिट
गुड लक.
सो नाउ अब वो प्राइस बढ़ सकती है.
जी प्राइस बढ़ेगी. आपकी एक मेजर डेस्टिनेशन जो है, पूरा कॉन्टिनेंट जो है वो आप बैंड है, आप जा नहीं सकते. और वो भी अगेन आई डोंट वांट टू मेक द कॉन्वर्सेशन अबाउट पॉलिटिक्स, लेकिन याद होगा कि क्यों बैन हुए थे. ठीक है, तो इस तरह की तो हम चीज़ें करते हैं. तो अच्छा, अब आइए कि ये हाई इंटेंट है, अनकॉम्प्रोमाइजिंग अप्रोच है, एट द कॉस्ट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल कैपिटल है.
व्हाई इज इट व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय एट द कॉस्ट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल?
बिकॉज कोई भी जब वो आके लोग पूछते हैं कि जी आप ये कर रहे हैं तो साथ ही पूछते हैं लेकिन आप तो फिर नौकरियां ख़त्म कर रहे हैं ना.
हाँ ठीक है, सही है. तो
अब ये कहाँ का लेजिटिमेट सवाल है यार? बिकॉज दैट इज नॉट द इंटेंट. ये नहीं किसी ने कहा कि यार आओ ढूंढ नौकरियां, नहीं. वो कह रहे हैं भाई इतना लॉस है, वो हुकूमत के पास अपना पैसा तो कुछ नहीं होता ना, टैक्स पेयर का पैसा. तो इतना लॉस है, उसको पे करना है, उसको तो कहाँ से करें, उसको एक्सटिंग्विश करना. ठीक है, अच्छा फिर PM and serious financial managers are on this. Finance Ministry, privatization, ठीक है ना जी. फिर steel mill and PIA, as I understand, have been restored to the privatization list. They had been at one point exempted from the privatization list. None of this is confidential information. This is all public information. ठीक है. Profitable entities have been included in privatization list because the Prime Minister said कि ये जो आपकी उसमें डिलिनिएशन है या डिफ्रेंसिएशन है कि प्रॉफिटेबल अनप्रॉफिटेबल नहीं.
It's all state owned.
It's all state owned that are not directly related to the security and defense.
So in OGTCL would be sold also.
So OGTCL is currently in a
grey area.
It's not a grey area. It's in a construct that was created to manage it. But absolutely, there are other profitable entities that are in the privatization list, and that's how they were placed.
Okay.
जी देखें, ये profitable unprofitable का सवाल नहीं है.
So that is
sensitive और commercial का सवाल है. Sensitive हैं तो ठीक है, समझ आती है, लेकिन अगर वो commercial entities हैं तो government should not be in the business of doing business.
ठीक है,
That's the principle. It is under implementation. ये देखें, मैं आपको बताऊं कि इसमें 3 discos has been announced, जो because discos are a big pain point. ठीक है ना जी, तो they have been announced कि इस साल के अंदर 3
प्राइवेटाइज हो
जाएंगी और बाकियों का पूरा एक शेड्यूल और वो बना हुआ है कि जी पहले हम ये 3 करेंगे, फिर अगली 3 करेंगे, फिर 3 ऐसी होंगी जिसके साथ मैनेजमेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करेंगे, क्योंकि वो बहुत उनको बेचना बड़ा मुश्किल है, क्योंकि द लॉसेस आर सच। ठीक है, अच्छा अब आप मुझे बताएं, ये एक लेजिस्लेशन पेश हुई, आपने देखा होगा न्यूज़ के अंदर, उसमें ये लेजिस्लेशन में था कि कॉग्निजेबल ऑफेंस बनाया जाए पावर थेफ्ट को। ठीक है, दैट लेजिस्लेशन, अब आप मुझे बताएं और आपके तवस्सुत से आपके नाजरीन बताएं कि इसमें क्या कंट्रोवर्सी है कि जी आप बिजली की चोरी कर रहे हैं, दिस इज कॉग्निजेबल ऑफेंस,
इसमें कोई होनी चाहिए नहीं
उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं जी ये तो डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी है।
क्यों?
ठीक है, आई एम नॉट गोइंग टू गेट इनटू क्यों, क्योंकि फिर वो कहते हैं जी आपको ख्याल नहीं है, आप एम्पैथी।
अच्छा गरीब, अच्छा ठीक है, तो गरीब तबका जो है चोरी करता है,
इसमें ये कहाँ से है कि आप कहें कि उसकी सिंपैथी कहाँ है जो कि एक सैलरीड इंडिविजुअल है और वो उनकी कोई एस्पिरेशंस, ड्रीम्स, क्या वो कोई करोड़पति हैं? वो who are they? They are people, they are Pakistanis, and they have for their entire careers done a disproportionate lifting of the burden. ठीक है, तो who's going to fight there? Why don't we balance the sympathy? ठीक है ना, जरूरत तो सबको है ना, we are a poor country.
That's true.
Right? So all of us could do with a few 100 billion more of GDP.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
So nobody's
Happily do it.
Nobody's going to say no to that. Right?
Yeah.
लेकिन जिन्होंने अपना बहुत इसके अंदर always they have been a source of disproportionate responsibility. ठीक है, तो let's talk about them, let's bring them into the equation once in a while. तो ये है। अच्छा, ये मैंने आपको बता दिया कि कॉग्निजेबल ऑफेंस को रोक दिया गया था। तो मेरे ख्याल के मुताबिक पाकिस्तानियों को, ज़िम्मेदार पाकिस्तानियों को सवाल, जर्नलिस्ट से भी ये सवाल पूछना चाहिए कि जी आप ये सवाल क्यों नहीं पूछते? वेयर वॉज द आउटरीच कि जी ये देखें ये तो बड़ी अच्छी एक लेजिस्लेशन थी, राइट? वेयर वॉज द आउटरीच? हर चीज़ पे तो हम आउटरीच कर देते हैं, राइट? हमारी सारी राइट्स ख़त्म हो गई हैं, इतने हमारे ऊपर जुल्म टूटे हुए हैं, रोज़ टूटते हैं। तो ये जो है वो तो हम इसको कॉग्निजेंस में ही नहीं लेते। अच्छा, अब आ जाए जो लास्ट वाला है, वो है दैट इज़ द थर्ड लीवर, and that's an expense lever. That's the right sizing of the
state apparatus.
The state apparatus.
उसमें भी बड़ी शिकायतें हैं,
उसमें भी बड़ी शिकायतें हैं,
उसमें भी बहुत पॉलिटिकल प्लेसमेंट्स हैं, उसमें पॉलिटिकल कैपिटल है।
अच्छा, तो देखिए मैं आपको बताऊं कि अगेन अब कॉमन इमेजिनेशन जो है वो यही है कि जी देखें ये सिफारिशें हैं, ये इस तरह हैं, इस तरह है, बट दैट इज़ द होंगी ज़रूर हर चीज़ के अंदर। क्योंकि दुनिया का कोई मुल्क आप उठा लें, उसके अंदर प्रोसेस जो है वो कहीं ना कहीं कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ हो जाती है, कुछ हो जाता है। बट इफ़ यू लुक एट द बाय एंड लार्ज, राइट, स्टेटिस्टिकली वो एक प्रोसेस के थ्रू आते हैं, वो इंडक्ट होते हैं, एक मुकाबले के इम्तिहान के थ्रू इंडक्ट होते हैं। दैट इज़ आर टॉप ब्यूरोक्रेसी। वो चलती जाती है कि इट्स एन इंस्टीट्यूशन, उनकी ट्रेनिंग होती है, उनकी डेवलपमेंट होती है, उनको रोटेट किया जाता है, उनको सो बाय एंड लार्ज दैट्स नॉट द प्रॉब्लम कि किसी का फ़ोन आ गया और किसी को उसने कर दिया। बाय एंड लार्ज द प्रॉब्लम इज़ कि फॉर मैनेजिंग एन इकोनॉमी ऑफ द मॉडेस्ट साइज दैट वी आर, why do we need this spread? ठीक है ना जी. That's the question.
Why do we need it?
Why do we need it?
And you know, this question was raised even by the previous government, yet their prime minister could not go ahead and do anything about it, even though he said इतना waste हो रहा है और मैं ये prime minister house को library बना दूंगा और ये कर दूंगा और वो सारी चीजें,
really
none of that got done.
Without going into the
political side of it, I get it.
You're giving me the, you know.
I'm just saying, I've heard it before.
You're baiting the hook. I'm going to keep this first one just above board. लेकिन देखिए मैं आपको बताऊं कि ये वही चीजें हैं कि आपके सामने जो थोड़ा सा एनेक्डोटल एविडेंस आता है ना, आप उसको कि मैं ये कर दूंगा इस बिल्डिंग को मैं, that's not how we are going to systematically and organically fix our problems for the long run.
How is this one different?
So, this one, here's the process. So let me just first, remember, first ask for the chance of success. If you want to gauge the chance of success of something, ask two questions. This is me as a consultant saying, right? Ask two questions, okay? Who's the team, right? And second question is, what's the process? Right? फिर उस प्रोसेस की जो सबवर्जन्स या लीकेजेस हैं वो बाद में बात कर लेंगे, लेकिन वो 80% जो होता है वो प्रोसेस के मुताबिक चलता है. ठीक है, लेट्स नॉट गेट डिस्ट्रैक्टेड बाय वो जो फेमस 5-star होटल में ठहरते हैं और सारा मुल्क, that's not where the problems are. The problems are that at a high scale, मैंने आपको millions गिनाए हैं अभी, a high scale on a statistical level we are not addressing, and they are not organic. कि भाई आप एक बंदे को इधर कर दो या ऐसे कर दो या ये कर दो, those are just window dressing. ठीक है ना जी. जो deep calm मेहनत वाला होने वाला है, तो let me describe to you the process. The process is, or the team is that the Prime Minister, again very early in his tenure, took cognizance of this, and one of the first actions was कि एक high powered कैबिनेट कमेटी तश्कील दी जाए, वो फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर उसको चेयर करे और उसके अंदर ए मिक्स ऑफ पॉलिटिशियंस, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, सीनियर गवर्नमेंट ऑफिशियल्स एंड सो ऑन, वो आ जाए और वो फिर इसको सिस्टमैटिकली लेके चले. अच्छा, लर्निंग फ्रॉम द प्रीवियस एक्सपीरियंस कि जी काफ़ी साल काम होता रहा और फिर वो उसका नहीं हुआ, तो उसको फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर सेड कि जी इसको लेट्स टेक इट इन चंक्स. ठीक है, 40+ मिनिस्ट्रीज हैं, उनको आप 5-5 के
ब्लॉक्स में निकाल के
मैनेजेबल वेव्स में उसको आप डिवाइड कर लें और लेट्स डू 4 to 6 to 8 weeks per wave, and then in 1 year, in 1 calendar year, let's finish off this entire thing. But let's not just analyze and recommend, but then those recommendations we send them to cabinet considers them and then approves them, and once they're approved, they are then sent back to the ministry in concern, in the subject ministry, and then a implementation committee starts to follow up. तो इसमें जो 2 सब tasks मैंने आपको बताए हैं, due diligence and implementation, I'm personally involved in those.
This sounds like a very long process.
It has to be a deliberate and thorough process.
But sometimes in a long process, what happens is that the organization can get lost in the process and forgets.
No, but that's why it was separated into chapters. Because when the first 5 ministries that were considered, that's done.
So once they're done, only then can you move to the next 5?
No, so what we do is, I mean, in terms of, there is overlap. We can't tidily do it seriatim because वो time का भी ख्याल रखना है हमने, तो overlap है उनमें, लेकिन by and large the process is कि जी आप एक का फैसला करें, वो फिर implementation में चल जाएं, हम दूसरे वाले कुछ, तो इस तरह से वो चल रही हैं. We are up to wave 5 और 8 टोटल वेव्स हैं. ठीक है,
so you're already up to wave 5 in terms of implementation even?
नहीं, implementation वाली जो हैं 2 implementation में आ चुकी हैं, तीसरी वाली जो है वो कैबिनेट को प्रेजेंट हो रही है.
कौन सी 2 आ चुकी हैं implementation में?
wave 1 and wave 2. अच्छा, उसमें 10 मिनिस्ट्रीज है ना.
अच्छा,
अब मैं भूल जाऊंगा, लेकिन आपने प्रेस में देखी हुई है वो कौन सी, वो लिस्ट है. ठीक है ना जी, तो वो चल रही हैं और वो चलती जाएंगी और वो भी रिलेंटलेस हैं. उसमें भी कोई so now let me describe to you कि वो जो एक आती है उसकी स्क्रूटनी, अब 5 मिनिस्ट्रीज हैं. अब हर मिनिस्ट्री के पास ऑन एवरेज 10, 12, 14, 15, कईयों के पास तो 30 भी नीचे इदारे हैं जिसको मिनिस्ट्रीज ओवरसी करती हैं।
ओके,
ठीक है ना जी। तो अब जब आप 40 को ज़र्ब दे दें 10-15 से, तो आपको फिर अगेन स्केल का एक,
यानी कि आप कह रहे हैं कि 400 से 600 इदारे
400 से 500 इदारे हैं, राइट। और वो कुछ छोटे हैं, कुछ बड़े हैं, कुछ का कोई पर्पस है, कुछ किसी लॉ के तहत बना, वो सारे हैं।
तो ये सब क्लीन अप होगा।
अब नहीं तो देखें क्लीन, अब ये अगर मैं हाँ कह दूं तो फिर तो एक बड़ी सोची समझी और जिसमें अच्छे लोग एक्सपर्ट्स भी हैं, उनका तजर्बा भी है, ब्यूरोक्रेसी के अपने लोग हैं उसके अंदर जिन्होंने कई रोल्स किए हुए हैं, उनकी फेमिलियरिटी भी है। तो लेट्स टॉक अबाउट कि हर वेव में किस तरह से ये चलता है। ठीक है ना जी। तो पहले दिन वो आ जाती हैं मिनिस्ट्रीज़, उनको फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर अंडर द सीनियर कमेटी वो मदऊ कर लेते हैं, वो आती हैं, वो प्रेजेंट करती हैं, इंट्रो देती हैं कि जी ये चीज़ें हम कर रहे हैं, ये इदारे हैं, उनके जो फैक्ट्स एंड फिगर्स हैं वो देती हैं इस तरह। फिर वो सब कमेटी में आ जाती हैं फॉर डिटेल ड्यू डिलिजेंस। और मैं आपको इसको इसकी सोब्राइटी को और इसकी जो जिम्मेदारी है उसको ताकि अंडर एस्टिमेट ना किया जाए, बिकॉज दिस कैन नॉट बी ए विम्सिकल एंड ए थॉटलेस प्रोसेस। कि सबको पता है एंड देयर इज नोबडी हु इज सेइंग कि जी लैक विदाउट ड्यू केयर या विदाउट इसको ड्यू कंसिडरेशन इसको किया जाए। बट एट द सेम टाइम देयर इज ए सीरियस प्रॉब्लम एज फार एज द फिस्कल स्पेस इज कंसर्न्ड। ठीक है, तो ये करना है इसको। देखिए इसके दो आउटकम्स है ना, एक तो डायरेक्ट कॉस्ट है राइट, और दूसरा आउटकम ये भी तो है ना कि वो बहुत सारी जो चीज़ें हैं वो होती रहती हैं, फंक्शंस होती रहती हैं। ये भी सोचना ज़रूरी है कि जी ये क्यों बनी थी, कब बनी थी, उसका उस वक्त क्या रेज़ों दियत क्या था, अब तक क्या अचीव किया है, कितनी एफिशिएंट है, कितनी नहीं एफिशिएंट, ये सारे सवाल उसके अंदर आते हैं। तो वो फिर सब कमेटी जो है बाय डिपार्टमेंट,
दैट लेवल ऑफ डिटेल, ठीक है ना जी, बाय डिपार्टमेंट, और उनकी डिपार्टमेंट की मैनेजमेंट भी वेलकम होती है। उसके अंदर कईयों के अंदर हम फिर फॉलो अप विजिट्स करते हैं, वहाँ जाके उनके साथ बैठते हैं, इंस्पेक्शन करते हैं, देखते हैं, गिनते हैं, उनको बेंचमार्क करने की कोशिश करते हैं। सो द वैरायटी ऑफ लीवर्स ऑफ एनालिसिस आर बीइंग ब्रॉट टू बेयर ऑन दिस थिंग टू फाइंड आउट कि जी कहाँ पे वेस्ट जो है, because we in current situation we cannot countenance waste. ठीक है, this should be non-controversial. I cannot understand somebody who says कि जी आप ये देखें, because how can we countenance waste when for absolute bare essentials we don't have fiscal space. Right? तो इस पे भी प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई, उसके अंदर वो पूरी प्रेस फुल कोर्ट प्रेस, ठीक है, फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर वाज चेयरिंग, मैं भी वहाँ पे बैठा, पता नहीं क्या कर रहा था, वहाँ बैठा हुआ। तो पहला सवाल ये हुआ कि जी ये तो फिर आप नौकरियाँ, और फिर उस तरह की चीज़ें कि हमें पता है कि वो 160 हैं, उनको किसी ने हाथ नहीं लगाना, और दिस इज इवन द courtesy of doing some thorough research, asking 5 questions, curious questions, कि जी आप बताएं क्या हो रहा है, कैसे होगा, इसका क्या फ़ायदा होगा, ठीक है, अवाम के लिए नुकसानात क्या हैं, मुश्किलात क्या हैं, फ़ायदे क्या हैं, उसको एक कंसिडर्ड और बैलेंस्ड इंफॉर्मेशन ट्रांसमिशन के फंक्शन को अदा करना, जो कि एक बहुत जमहूरियत के लिए जो प्रेस और मीडिया का रोल है, इट कैन नॉट बी overstated. Right? The reason that they don't fulfill that role is the answer why content like podcasts have come up.
It's come up. And
because though they're doing this for ratings and money, but we do this for the actual, like you said, solving the problem, right? What is the answer?
And isn't technology marvelous?
It's amazing.
Because as soon as a market, right, distorts and a need is created, technology comes in
and saves the day and solves the problem.
Sorts the problem out.
Because there's no media that will give you the space to have a detailed and thorough discussion on a topic.
And I get,
but podcasts do.
I get plenty of requests And literally, based on my first, I won't go. I won't do it.
Because they're not going to give you the space.
No, because and even that would be fine, right? कि भाई अगर आपका मुझे ना स्पेस देना जवाज बनता है तो आप करें.
ठीक है.
लेकिन अगर आप मेरे से पता करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि इन्फॉर्मेशन तो दीजिए ना कि हो क्या रहा है, और फिर आप कहें कि नहीं यार ये तो मज़ा नहीं आएगा क्योंकि मैं चैम्पियन ऑफ द पीपल हूँ और आप क्योंकि इस्लामाबाद से आए हैं तो ज़रूर आप में कुछ दाल में कुछ काला है, ठीक है. And that's a case that doesn't have to be made, right? It's cheap shots.
Yeah, that's right.
It's cheap shots. कि जी मैं आपको इंटरप्ट कर दूंगा, ठीक है, तो मैं अपनी रेटिंग बनाऊंगा और आप को मैं शर्मिंदा करूंगा और ये तो दिस इज गॉड जोन हुआ. तो ये but then you can see what is going to happen in the United States of America, which I consider to be the most efficient market in all of these things. वहाँ पे आपने तो देख लिया है कि वो सारों की स्टॉक्स ही वैल्यूज ही खत्म हो गई. I recently discovered that our legacy media do not have what is called an investigative journalist. I did not know this.
They've got some.
वो ठीक है,
but
वो notable exception. देखिए हर चीज में notable exception होती है, but as a rule,
yes,
investigation is called. They call a source.
Yes.
मैं तो टोटम पोल पे कहीं नहीं हूँ, मुझे फोन आ जाते हैं कि जी कुछ बताएं. कि जी मैं क्या बताऊँ, अब मोस्ट ऑफ इट इज कॉन्फिडेंशियल, ठीक है, और फिर मैं आपको क्या बोर करूँ, राइट. So anyway, that's a side conversation. But in this one, it was to me.
But this is pretty comprehensive. I'm actually pretty impressed कि इतनी डिटेल में जाके मतलब मिनिस्ट्री के अंदर, इदारों के अंदर, डिपार्टमेंट्स के अंदर ये देखना कि किस लेवल पे वेस्ट हो रही है, and then bring it back to a recommendations committee and then do an implementations committee.
और वहाँ फिर देखें, अच्छा तो that wasn't finished. फिर वो फ्रेम होती हैं, फिर वो मेन कमेटी में विद FM चेयरिंग वो फिर उन मिनिस्ट्रीज को प्रेजेंट होती हैं, फिर वो फीडबैक देते हैं, फिर उसको
अच्छा the ministry has a chance to defend itself.
फीडबैक देते हैं, फिर उसको इनकॉर्पोरेट.
So it's not a unilateral decision कि आके हमने बस कर देना है.
उसके ऊपर फीडबैक को इनकॉर्पोरेट किया जाता है, फिर वो
How did they manage to do such a thorough approach within 12, I mean, I'm not saying that the government's amazing or anything, but I'm just saying that within 12 months to have put this into play and have results where you're saying wave 1 and wave 2 already inki efficiencies.
Dimension 1. 2 questions you have to ask.
Who's the team and what's the process?
And 2, what's the process that the team has devised? Because the team devises the process, right?
And how did the current setup remove roadblocks for its own teams? Because ये भी एक challenge आता है ना कि लोग तो आपने रख लिए हैं लेकिन वो लोग अपने roadblocks में फंस जाते हैं. अब लास्ट गवर्नमेंट ने भी ये किया था, कुछ जगहों पे अच्छे लोग थे लेकिन they were unceremoniously removed because of the roadblocks that presented themselves, and I'm talking about in the digital space.
Again, I'm not going to make longitudinal comparisons because I think as a friend you know my view on that. So मैं आपको ये बता दूं कि again the prime minister is focused, he's smart and he's relentless, and he's the hardest working Pakistani that I know.
Really?
Oh,
what are his hours? 24 hours.
He doesn't take a break. I'm again because saying these things they have been made so controversial that you just said I'm not praising the government, right? And I'm feeling a little put on the कि जी वो देखे क्या इसका लोग नतीजा करेंगे. उसमें डिस्क्लेमर में मैं कहना चाहता हूँ कि मुझे कुछ नहीं मिलता. मैं अपनी
तो why do it for free?
खर्चा जो है
क्यों करते हैं फिर ये आप?
इससे बड़ा प्रिविलेज कोई हो सकता है?
आप एनजीओ खड़ा करके सर्व करें लोगों को.
मैं एनजीओ में बिलीव, इसको सेंसर कर दीजिएगा. आई डोंट बिलीव इन एनजीओस.
स्कूल्स में इन्वेस्ट कर लें.
नहीं, जब गवर्नमेंट
तो ये बड़ा एक very important, and I was waiting for us to ask this when you were going to conclude that part of it, Okay, what motivates a person to do all of this effort for a state, for pro bono, for free?
It's not for the state.
Who is it for?
Me. It's a very easy answer. You cannot do anything. Human beings, an individual does not have the resources, the lifespan, the health, the energy, and the talent to do anything for beyond themselves.
I find that. What about Henry Ford built the automobile?
No, but that was
Built it for
but I'm not saying that you
generations.
can't have purpose. I'm saying that people who say Henry Ford maybe did or maybe didn't, I don't know, but he didn't say I'm out to save the world. His calling was, I like to tinker and invent and have an engineering mindset, and I like to solve problems. And I like to see people develop, right? I was a teacher in my first stint. I was a teacher. In my second stint, I was a consultant, and I tell you that my brand in consulting was that you build the team, and the team will solve the problems. You have to build people. You have to build capabilities. And in my third stint, very humbly, right? This is an opportunity of a lifetime. I don't know if you'll keep this one, because when I announced my retirement, there was some. So at that point, my sentiment was that if you put on my gravestone that this is the person who built the McKinsey office of Pakistan office of McKinsey, I've achieved what I. But now it is. I think it was. Was it Martin Luther King or was it Queen Elizabeth who said anybody can be great because everyone can be great because anyone can serve. तो सर्विस से आगे तो कोई चीज़ नहीं है. लेकिन ये मैं आई विल ऑलवेज पुश बैक कि आप सर्विस किसी के लिए, ये जो सैक्रिफाइस का कॉन्सेप्ट है ना, वो तो रिजेंटमेंट ब्रीड करता है कि जी मैं सैक्रिफाइस कर रहा हूँ तो आप मुझे थैंक यू कहने नहीं आए.
तो आप कह रहे हैं कि सर्विस और सैक्रिफाइस में फ़र्क है, ये मतलब
सर्विस इज द मिशन, द कॉलिंग ought to be served. That's why you've heard in the US people will salute somebody in uniform and say thank you for your service, right? But that's just the poster child for service, because they put their life at risk. But we all put our life at risk, right? The fireman puts his life at risk. The policeman puts his life at risk. The person who cleans the street puts his life at risk.
So to you, service is when you, I mean, technically those guys are getting paid for it, right? So how is it service? It's a job.
Yeah, so getting paid for it or not getting paid for it is the way I look at it. Again, I mean, we're getting us into some philosophical territory, but the way I interpret that is that in order to serve, you must preserve.
Okay.
So it's your responsibility to take care of yourself. Because if you can't take care of yourself,
how can you take care of the other?
Forget the others. You're going to become a burden
on the others too.
Right? So the first marker to hit is to say, my productivity, and it ties right back to this thing. My productivity is humbly such that I can take care. I mean, it's concentric circles, right? It's like, okay, in individual, family, right?
Community.
So I don't want to hear of anybody who's sacrificing while their kids are suffering. Because
then what's the point?
Who's going to take care of that, man?
Yeah.
Right? So pehle so concentric circles, right? Neighborhood, community, city, state. तो आप करें कोशिश, बहुत अच्छी बात है, लेकिन this is a complex discussion of purpose. But
I like that. I like to serve. You must first preserve.
You have to. That's a precondition.
Yeah.
You know, you can't say my house is a shambles,
Yeah, but I'm
right?
gonna
My
go out
kids
and-
don't go to school, and I'm here protesting
Yeah.
some unfairness that is happening many thousand miles. I mean, I don't understand that, right? Because you have no agency in that problem, by the way,
Yeah.
right? And by intervention, that's another complex idea. People think that they can sort things out by expressing outrage about them. But they don't understand the side effects, the costs of that, what they're doing, right? When you protest and you do it in a disruptive way, I can just show you that the dots connect right away. Somebody else, somewhere, at the other end of the process that you've just disrupted, has ended up dead. It's not trivial to mess with complex systems and think that you're fixing them somehow.
Or that there would be no outcome of your actions.
We're too small to try to disrupt complex systems that have gained stability over eons and say, you know what, we can just kick this thing and somehow or the other, in our ham-handed way, cause improvement. That is an arrogant thought that we can take, we can challenge in trivial ways. You know, things that have stabilized over millennia. So you know.
But this was good. This was, I like that. I was surprised. I was not expecting that level of thoughtfulness going into the. I mean, I've seen the team. The team is good, but I didn't see that level of detail. I think this is the first time I'm getting a snippet of what's happening. And I think what's interesting is that this will take time to yield the kind of results, but the results could be amazing, actually.
No, but they will be amazing, and because this is inexorable, Faizan.
Yeah.
ऐसी चीजें रिवर्स नहीं हो सकती.
नहीं, मुश्किल है बड़ा.
Some dent will be made,
Yeah.
and then that will because it's organic, right? It's with the right diagnostic. It's poking at the right problem.
Yeah.
Right, and in a very thoughtful and deliberative way, which is also cognizant of the risks that all such interventions trigger, and is thinking about, therefore, how do we mitigate those risks, right? But that's not a daily, weekly, monthly, even annual calendar. That's a decadal calendar, and we have to just grasp this idea. And you know, so if I could just leave with the support, positivity in every way of analysis, right? Your own health will be better under positivity than under hopelessness, despair, and cynicism. Right? It protects you against some hurts. कि मैंने तो पहले ही कहा था कुछ नहीं हो सकता, right? But when I look at the commentariat, and I want to focus on this thing. When I look at the commentariat, right, they are it's not like, oh my, it's not going to work again, right? It's like, see, our prescient analysis told you that it's not going to work, and now it hasn't.
Yeah.
What prophethood are we claiming? I mean, like, what is this? Right?
Yeah.
So just look at we started the conversation at observation, analysis, diagnosis, recommendation. Implementation को तो छोड़ दे, ठीक है? आप उस हर राइट अप की एंड पे गो राइट टू द एंड, आपको पहले कई पैराग्राफ्स में कोई नई चीज नहीं मिलेगी.
रिकमेंडेशन देख,
आप नहीं ढूंढें कि कोई रिकमेंडेशन है कि क्या करना चाहिए. उसमें ये होगा, वी शुड करेक्ट कोर्स बिफोर इट्स टू लेट. व्हाई डिडंट आई थिंक ऑफ दैट यार? You know,
right?
This time it's, it's like, let's get over ourselves, man. We have the 5th largest country in the world. You will not find a country of this size and importance at a level of development that requires so much of us.
This is good. Thank you so much, Salman, for the time. I'm walking away with some new knowledge. I know it's a little bit, it can be dry and hard to get through, but it's important to hear it. And I think that...
But the best conversations are where both sides walk away with some new knowledge.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not a conversation. It's just a...
Yeah. It's a monologue.
It's a monologue. It's
Yeah.
a waste of... And monologues, हो ही नहीं सकता ना.
Yeah.
There is no
That's
such
true.
thing as a monologue.
That's true. But I appreciate it and I wish you well in your path of service. I think ये जो आप काम कर रहे हैं, we need this work. And good people like you coming in and serving are also, by the way, an inspiration for some of the younger folk who watch this and say, यार हम क्यों करें कुछ इस हुकूमत के लिए.
आप देखें उनको मेरे पास भेजने. एक तो मैं सबको कहता हूँ कि inspiration has a very short shelf life. Right? You have to make a decision for the rest of your days. कि जी ये कॉलिंग है, मैं इधर जा रहा हूँ. हर करियर भी आपकी कॉलिंग ही होती है ना. और
सही बात है.
तो ये कर, लेकिन मुझे जहाँ आपकी बहुत ज़्यादा उसकी ज़रूरत है, राइट, बिकॉज वी नीड थॉटफुल डिस्कोर्स. We need to engage our people, right? I'm also, one of the things that I'm doing, keep this out of the right, I'm creating a dialogue, not creating dialogue, but I have a small cell with the PMS that क्या आप इसको करें, right? So, and the purpose of that is to create a dialogue, because politics is a dialogue between the polity and their representatives. The whole process is a dialogue between the polity and their representatives. If that dialogue is disrupted or that dialogue is not allowed to proceed or it doesn't obtain in the first place, that is the biggest threat to organic evolution than anything else.
Right.
If that dialogue proceeds, nothing can prevent it. I'm telling you, आप 250 मिलियन लोगों को ऐसे हाथ रख के रोकने की कोशिश करें. आप समंदर में चले जाएं, वहां पे सुनामी आ रही है, आप हाथ से रोकने की तो रुक जाएगी वो.
नहीं रुक सकते.
हरिकेन आ रहा है, आप कहें रुक जा भाई. No. Yeah. This is the power of people.
Yeah, that's true.
So usme I really need your guidance, because this voice, this voice is so arrogant, but the dialogue, how do we stimulate that dialogue? Point me in the right directions. I'll go and create the agency. Right? कि इधर हो सकता है, कहाँ कैसे engage करें, youth के साथ कैसे dialogue कायम करें, ladies के साथ कैसे dialogue कायम करें, farmers के साथ कैसे करें. How do we do that?
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you all for staying tuned to Digitales. Like, subscribe, comment करें, and let us know who you would like to see next. Bye-bye.